They tried to sell her like livestock. The cowboy rode in and said, "She belongs only to herself." The sun rose slowly over the small village, casting golden light on the dusty paths and mud-brick houses. Amina woke before anyone else, her eyes blinking against the weak morning light that slipped through the narrow window of her room. The village was quiet at this hour, except for the distant sound of roosters crowing and the soft rustle of leaves in the early wind. She sat up on the thin straw mat that served as her bed and rubbed her eyes, thinking about the day ahead. Life had never been easy for Amina. Her family lived in a small, cramped house at the edge of the village. Her father, a farmer, struggled to make enough money to feed them. Her mother, worn from years of hard work, looked after the household and the younger children. Amina, as the eldest daughter, had always felt a responsibility to help. She swept the floors, fetched water from the well, and helped her mother in the tiny kitchen. Her hands were calloused, her back often sore, but she never complained. There was no time for complaints. Life was about survival. Despite all the hardship, Amina had dreams. She wanted to learn, to read books that told stories of other places and other lives. She imagined walking in cities full of light and color, meeting people who spoke in different tones and laughed freely. Sometimes, late at night, when the rest of the family slept, she would quietly open a small, worn notebook and try to write her own stories. Writing made her feel free, even if just for a little while. But freedom was not something easily found in her world. Her family, like many others in the village, struggled under the weight of poverty. Food was scarce, and money was even scarcer. In recent months, her father had begun speaking more often about marriage. Not just any marriage, but one that could bring some relief to the family's financial struggles. At first, Amina thought he meant a kind, normal arrangement where love and respect mattered. But slowly, she began to realize that this was different. They were not thinking about her happiness. They were thinking about her as something that could be exchanged, something that could solve their problems. Amina first heard the words by accident. She had been walking past the kitchen when she overheard her father speaking to a neighbor. "She is grown now," he said. "We must think of what is best for the family. A good match could solve many of our problems." The neighbor nodded, speaking in agreement. The words sank into Amina's heart like cold stones. She understood immediately what he meant. She was not being considered as a person with dreams or feelings. She was being considered as property. Days passed, and the tension at home grew. Conversations became hushed when she entered the room. Her father spoke less directly, but she could see the worry etched in his brow. Her mother was quiet, often avoiding her eyes. It was clear to Amina that decisions were being made about her life without her consent. She tried to speak to her parents, to explain that she wanted to continue her studies, that she wanted to choose her own path. But her words were met with silence, or gentle but firm reminders of the family's struggles. One afternoon, she overheard a conversation that made her heart race with fear. Her father was talking to a man she had never seen before. "We need someone who can take care of her," he said. "She is young and strong. She can help in the household and carry on the family's work. I am sure we can reach a fair agreement." The man smiled, and Amina felt a chill run down her spine. The way they spoke about her made it feel like she was livestock, like an object to be sold rather than a human being with thoughts and dreams. Amina spent the rest of that day in a quiet corner of the house, thinking. She tried to imagine escape, but the village was small, and nowhere felt safe. She had no money, no friends outside the village, and the roads leading out were long and dangerous. She could feel the walls closing in, the weight of decisions made for her pressing down on her. But deep inside, a small spark of hope remained. She would not give up completely. Somehow, she would find a way to protect herself. As days turned into weeks, the plans became clearer. Amina's father had arranged for her to meet with the man properly, in a remote place outside the village. She was told she would go with a neighbor who had been asked to accompany her. The instructions were simple: stay quiet, do as you are told. But Amina could feel her heart racing at the thought of what awaited her. The reality was terrifying. She had heard stories from other girls in the village, stories of those who had been sent away and never returned the same. The night before she was to leave, Amina could not sleep. She lay on her mat, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside. Her mind raced with questions. What if she refused? What would they do? What if no one helped her? She wanted to cry, but she did not. Instead, she clenched her fists and made a silent promise to herself. She would fight for her freedom, no matter how small the chance. Morning came with a heavy sky, and Amina's heart felt heavier still. She helped her mother prepare the small bundle of things she would take with her. There was a thin blanket, a change of clothes, and a few small items that reminded her of home. Her mother looked at her with a mixture of sadness and fear, but said nothing. Amina kissed her cheek and stepped outside, feeling the dust of the village under her feet. The neighbor who was to accompany her arrived on time, and they began walking toward the meeting place. Amina kept her eyes down, trying to appear obedient, while inside, her mind was alert, searching for any opportunity to escape or seek help. The path they took led to open fields, where the wind blew strong and the horizon seemed endless. Amina felt both small and exposed, as though the world was waiting to swallow her whole. Along the way, she remembered the small lessons her father had once taught her. Be careful with strangers, trust your instincts, and always observe before speaking. Those words now felt bitterly ironic. The people who were supposed to protect her had chosen profit over love, but still, she clung to that advice. She observed, she listened, she counted steps, and she memorized the paths. Any detail might help her survive. As they approached the place, a large house at the edge of the field, Amina's heart pounded like a drum. She could see men moving about, speaking in low voices, inspecting the grounds. The air felt heavy and oppressive. She felt the fear rise like a tide, threatening to overwhelm her. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that she was not helpless. Somewhere beyond the fear, she had to find courage. Somewhere, she had to find a way to keep herself free. The neighbor knocked on the door, and Amina stepped inside with a forced calm. The interior was dimly lit, with dust floating in the air and a faint smell of old wood and oil. Men were seated around, speaking quietly. Their eyes followed her as she entered, making her feel small and exposed. She swallowed hard, keeping her head down, her heart racing, but she would not cry. Not yet. One man stood, a tall figure with a rough voice. He spoke as though discussing animals rather than a person. Amina felt her stomach twist in fear and anger. This was the moment she had dreaded, and yet she remained silent, her mind racing for any possible escape. She focused on breathing, keeping calm, and remembering her promise to herself. She belonged to no one but herself. Hours passed in a blur of whispers and inspection. Amina felt trapped in a world where her voice did not matter. Each second seemed endless. She counted the floor tiles, memorized the cracks in the walls, and kept her mind focused on survival. The world outside seemed distant, almost unreal, but she clung to the thought of freedom, the thought that someone somewhere might intervene. As the day wore on, Amina's hope was nearly gone. She felt the despair creeping in, the feeling that she might never escape. And yet deep within, a tiny spark remained. She held on to it, imagining herself walking away, imagining the sun on her face and the wind in her hair, imagining life on her own terms. She did not know how or when or who would help, but she knew she could not give up. Just as the hopelessness seemed overwhelming, a faint sound reached her ears, the sound of hooves on the ground. At first, she thought it was a dream, but the sound grew louder, steady and strong. The door opened, and a figure appeared, riding in on a horse, calm but commanding. Amina looked up, her eyes wide with surprise and a flicker of hope. She did not know who he was, but somehow she felt that everything might change in that moment. The man dismounted and walked toward the group, his eyes steady, his presence strong. He spoke not with anger but with certainty, and Amina felt something shift inside her. Perhaps, she thought, perhaps there is someone in this world who sees her not as property, but as a human being with a right to her own life. Amina could hardly believe her eyes. The figure on the horse was calm, yet there was a strength in him that made the room seem smaller, as if his presence pushed back the fear that had filled her heart for weeks. The men who had been speaking about her, as if she were a thing, turned to look at him. There was a brief silence, heavy and sharp, like the air before a storm. Amina's heart pounded in her chest. She did not know this man, but somehow, seeing him gave her courage she did not know she had. The man dismounted and tied his horse outside, his movements careful but confident. He walked into the room without a word at first, his eyes scanning the faces around him. There was no hesitation, no question about who was in the wrong. He looked directly at the men, his gaze steady and unwavering. "This ends now," he said calmly. His voice was deep and firm, and even the walls seemed to listen. Amina took a step back, pressing herself against the corner of the room. Her heart still raced, but now it was mixed with a cautious hope. Maybe, just maybe, this stranger could stop what had been happening. She did not understand how one person could make such a difference, but she felt a tiny spark of relief that someone had come. The men in the room were clearly surprised by his appearance. They exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to respond. "Who are you?" one of them demanded, his voice harsh and defensive. "This is none of your business." The cowboy's eyes did not leave them. "It is my business whenever someone is being treated as property," he said simply. There was no anger, only certainty. "She belongs to no one but herself. You will not claim her and you will not harm her." Amina felt her chest lift slightly. Hearing those words, spoken so firmly, gave her a sense of safety she had not felt in weeks. For the first time, she realized that she might actually have a chance to escape the terrible situation she was in. Her legs trembled as she listened to the conversation, but she stayed calm, knowing that any sudden movement could cause panic. The men laughed at first, a low, mocking sound. "You don't understand," one said. "She has been promised. She is meant for a good match. You cannot interfere." The cowboy shook his head slowly. "No one is meant for a match against their will. No one is a thing to be bought or sold. She is a human being. That is enough." His voice grew stronger with each word, and Amina could feel the weight of it in her chest. It was as if his certainty was filling the room, pushing back the fear and the greed. One of the men stepped closer, trying to assert control. "You do not know how things work here," he said. "It is tradition. She must obey. It is for the good of her family." Amina felt her stomach twist. Those words were the same ones she had heard for weeks, but now they felt smaller, weaker, because of the man standing before them. The cowboy did not move or raise his voice. He simply looked at them with steady eyes, and in that silence the men seemed to lose some of their confidence. "I do know how things work," he said quietly, yet with power. "And I also know how things should work. Every person has a right to their own life. This girl has a right to choose. You will respect that, or you will answer to me." The men shifted uncomfortably. Some muttered among themselves, and the air in the room felt tense. Amina could feel her hope growing, her courage returning. For the first time, she thought that maybe she could walk away from this nightmare and live the life she had dreamed of. The cowboy turned to Amina then, his voice softening. "Are you all right?" he asked. His tone was gentle, not condescending, and it made her feel seen for the first time in weeks. She nodded, unable to speak at first, her throat tight with emotion. I think so," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. He gave her a small nod. "Good. You are stronger than you think. Remember that." The men, realizing that the stranger was serious and would not leave, began to retreat slowly. Some muttered threats, but they did not approach Amina again. The cowboy's presence had changed the room. The fear that had hung thick in the air was lifting, replaced by a cautious relief. Amina took a deep breath, feeling her legs finally stop trembling. She had survived the worst part of the day, but she knew there was still danger. She could not yet relax completely. She stayed close to the cowboy, her hands trembling slightly, but her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. The man led her outside, where the air was fresher and the sun shone more brightly than she remembered. The horse waited patiently, tied to a post, and the cowboy gestured for her to climb onto it. She hesitated for a moment, uncertain, but he smiled reassuringly. "It is safe," he said. "I will not let anything happen to you." Once she was seated behind him on the horse, the ride began slowly. The village and the threatening house receded into the distance, replaced by open fields and winding paths. Amina could feel the wind on her face, and for the first time in weeks she felt a sense of freedom, small but real. As they rode, the cowboy did not speak much, but that was not necessary. His presence was enough. Amina's mind raced with thoughts of what had happened, of the fear she had felt, and of the hope that was now returning. She realized that she had never truly believed she could escape, but now she knew it was possible. She had survived, and she had someone to help her. They stopped at a small stream to rest. Amina climbed down from the horse and sat by the water, watching the ripples move with the current. She could hear birds singing in the trees, a sound that felt almost magical after the tense hours she had endured. The cowboy offered her some water from a small canteen, and she drank gratefully, feeling strength return to her body. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice still shaky. The cowboy nodded. "You do not need to thank me," he said. "The only thanks needed is that you live your life freely. That is what matters." Amina thought about what he had said. It was simple, yet powerful. For so long, she had been treated as if her life belonged to someone else. Now she realized that she had the right to her own choices, her own path. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had been taught to obey, to follow orders, to accept what was decided for her, but now she felt a new kind of strength, the strength of self-determination. The cowboy studied her quietly for a moment. "You are brave," he said. "Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to keep moving forward even when you are afraid. Remember that." Amina nodded, committing his words to memory. She understood now that bravery did not mean fighting with fists or weapons. It meant standing up for herself, making choices, and refusing to be treated as less than human. As the sun began to set, casting warm colors across the fields, they continued riding. Amina looked out across the horizon, imagining the life ahead of her. There were no guarantees, and the road would be difficult, but for the first time, she believed she had a chance. She had survived the worst moment of her life, and she had someone who respected her, someone who reminded her that she belonged to herself. The ride continued into the evening, and as darkness fell, Amina felt a quiet peace settle in her heart. The fear of what had happened earlier in the day still lingered, but it was tempered by hope. She realized that she was not powerless. She had choices. She had a voice. She had the ability to shape her own future. That night, they camped in a small clearing with a fire to keep them warm. Amina sat quietly, listening to the crackling of the flames, reflecting on the events of the day. The memory of the men who had tried to treat her as property was still painful, but it no longer felt insurmountable. She had survived, and she had regained a measure of control over her life. The cowboy sat nearby, tending the fire. He did not speak much, allowing her space to process her thoughts. Every now and then he would glance at her and nod, as if to remind her that she was safe, that she was free to think and feel and plan. Amina felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for his help, but for the lesson he had given her, that she was her own person, and that nothing could take that away unless she allowed it. As the stars appeared in the sky above, Amina lay back on the ground, feeling the warmth of the fire and the cool night air. She thought about the life she wanted, the dreams she still held, and the courage she had discovered within herself. She knew the journey ahead would not be easy, but she also knew that she no longer had to face it in fear. She had survived the auction of her life, and she had reclaimed herself. The night was quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire. Amina lay on her thin blanket, staring at the sky. Stars twinkled above, distant and calm, so different from the fear and chaos she had felt earlier that day. The memory of the house, the men, and the whispers of her family still lingered in her mind, but they seemed smaller now, less powerful. With the cowboy by her side, she felt a strange mixture of relief, hope, and determination. She had survived the worst, but she knew the journey to real freedom had just begun. The cowboy, whose name she later learned was Elias, sat quietly across from her. He had ridden into her life with a calm certainty that had shaken the men who had tried to claim her. Yet Elias was not boastful or loud. He was steady and thoughtful. He knew the strength of a person did not come from force, but from belief in what was right. Amina watched him as he tended the fire, and she felt safe in his presence, like the world had briefly paused to give her a chance to breathe. "Rest while you can," Elias said softly. "Tomorrow we begin the journey properly." Amina nodded, though sleep did not come immediately. She thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the humiliation, and the sudden hope. For so long she had felt powerless. Her life had been planned by others, where she should go, what she should do, who she would belong to. Now, for the first time, she realized that she had a choice. That realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next morning, the sun rose over the fields, painting the world in shades of gold and green. Amina stretched and felt a stiffness in her muscles from the long ride and the tense hours of the previous day. Elias had already begun preparing for the journey, checking his horse and supplies. He had a calm, steady rhythm to his movements, a quiet confidence that made her feel safe. "Are you ready?" he asked, glancing at her. She nodded, feeling the determination rise within her. "Yes," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "I'm ready." As they rode through the fields and along narrow dirt paths, Amina looked around at the world she had never truly seen. The open fields, the rolling hills, and the distant trees seemed almost magical compared to the confined life of the village. She realized how much of her life had been spent in small spaces, under constant pressure and fear. Now, for the first time, she could feel air in her lungs that was truly free, and it made her heart swell. Elias spoke occasionally, giving her gentle guidance. "You must learn to trust yourself," he said. "You are capable of more than you know. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite fear." Amina repeated his words in her mind, letting them sink into her soul. They were simple words, but they carried a truth she had never fully understood. She had survived fear, humiliation, and threats, yet she was still standing. That alone was proof that she had strength. As the day went on, they encountered small obstacles, rough paths, streams that needed crossing, and thickets of bushes that slowed them down. Each time, Elias would guide her, showing her not just the way through the obstacles, but also the mindset needed to face challenges. He encouraged her to observe carefully, to think ahead, and to act with both caution and confidence. By late afternoon, they stopped in a small clearing near a river to rest. Amina dismounted, her legs tired but her spirit growing stronger. She knelt by the water and splashed her face, feeling the cold water wash away some of the tension. The world seemed larger than she had imagined, full of possibilities that she had never dared to consider before. "You are learning fast," Elias said, watching her. "Not just about the land, but about yourself. You are stronger than most people realize." Amina smiled faintly, feeling a warmth in her chest. She had always believed she was weak, destined to follow orders and obey decisions made for her. Now she understood that strength had always been inside her. It had simply been buried under fear and expectation. As they rested, Amina spoke for the first time about her family. "I don't know what will happen if I return," she admitted. They tried to sell me. They don't see me as a person." Her voice trembled and she looked down at the water. Elias nodded solemnly. "It is hard to break old patterns, but your life is yours, not theirs. You have the right to choose your path, even if it means leaving behind those who do not understand your worth." His words settled over her like a gentle shield. She realized that leaving the village, leaving her family's expectations behind, did not mean she was abandoning them. It meant she was honoring herself. It meant she was finally living as the person she was meant to be. The journey continued over several days. Amina learned to ride with more confidence, to observe the world with alertness, and to think ahead for her safety. Elias did not just protect her physically. He taught her how to protect herself mentally and emotionally. Every choice, every observation, every cautious step was a lesson in self-reliance. Along the way, they met others. A kind farmer who offered them fresh bread, a traveler who shared water, and children playing near a stream who waved cheerfully. These small interactions reminded Amina that the world was not filled with fear and greed alone. There was kindness, too. There were people who saw others as equals, who respected freedom, and who believed in fairness. Each encounter strengthened her resolve to live her life fully, rather than simply survive. One evening, as the sky turned pink and orange with the setting sun, Elias stopped at a safe, hidden location. They made camp, and for the first time, Amina allowed herself to relax completely. She sat by the fire, watching the flames dance, thinking about how far she had come. Just a few days ago, she had been trapped in a room, treated as property, unsure if anyone would intervene. Now, she was sitting by a fire under the open sky, safe and free, with a man who had shown her that courage and kindness could change everything. "You have come far in a short time," Elias said, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Not everyone survives what you have survived, and not everyone learns what you have learned. You are stronger than you give yourself credit for." Amina felt tears prick her eyes. She had always hidden her emotions, afraid that showing them would make her weak. But now, with Elias, it felt safe to feel. She realized that acknowledging her fear and her pain did not make her weak, it made her human. It made her ready to face the future with honesty and courage. That night, as she lay on her blanket, she thought about the life she wanted. She wanted to continue learning, to explore the world, and to make her own choices. She wanted to help others who might be in situations like hers. She wanted to live with dignity and respect, not fear. And she knew that, with courage and determination, she could achieve it. The days that followed were not easy. There were long rides, cold nights, and moments when fear returned, whispering doubts into her mind. But each time she remembered Elia's words, "Courage is moving forward despite fear." She reminded herself of the spark of hope that had survived in her heart when the men had tried to claim her. That spark had grown into a flame, lighting her path forward. Finally, after several days, they reached a small town far from the village. The streets were bustling with people, carts, and animals. Amina felt a thrill of excitement. The town was bigger, more vibrant, and full of possibilities. Here, she could start anew, far from the pressures and expectations that had threatened to steal her life. Elias guided her to a safe place to stay, a small inn where she could rest and recover. He spoke quietly to her about the importance of planning her next steps, of finding work, education, and a community that respected her rights. Amina listened carefully, absorbing every word. She felt a sense of empowerment she had never known before. "You are ready to take the next step on your own," Elias said. "But remember, you are never alone. The strength you have gained will guide you, and the lessons you have learned will protect you." Amina nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and determination. She realized that freedom was not just about escaping danger. It was about learning to live fully, to make choices, and to honor herself in every action. She had survived fear, humiliation, and threats. She had reclaimed herself. and now she was ready to truly live. That night, as she lay in a small bed for the first time in safety, she thought about the cowboy who had saved her, about the courage that had been awakened in her heart, and about the future she could shape. She smiled quietly to herself. The road ahead would be long and full of challenges, but for the first time she knew she had the strength to walk it on her own terms. And as sleep finally claimed her, she whispered softly to herself, "I belong to myself. No one can take that away." The journey had been long, and the memories of the fear and uncertainty still lingered, but they no longer controlled her. She was awake, alive, and free to choose her path. Elias had left early, as he often did, moving on to help others in need, but he had left her with words that continued to echo in her mind. "You are your own guide now. Trust yourself. Courage and wisdom are already within you." Those words felt like a warm cloak around her heart. She had learned so much in the past days: how to observe the world carefully, how to act with courage, and most importantly, that her life belonged only to herself. The town outside the inn was waking up, full of life and motion. Merchants arranged their stalls, children ran laughing along the streets, and the smell of fresh bread and roasted coffee filled the air. Amina stepped outside, taking in the sights and sounds. The world seemed larger, fuller, and brighter than she had imagined. Every sound, every movement reminded her that life could be vibrant, joyful, and hers to live freely. Her first task was to find a place where she could begin her new life. She knew that to truly claim her freedom, she needed independence. She had no money, no family nearby, and no one to rely on. But she also knew she had something more valuable than money: courage, wisdom, and the belief that she could shape her own future. Amina wandered through the streets carefully, observing the people around her. She noticed the small kindnesses: a shopkeeper smiling as he helped a customer, a mother guiding her children along the path, a young man offering directions to a lost traveler. These small acts reminded her that the world was not only harsh, it was also full of goodness. She took a deep breath, feeling determination grow in her chest. She would find a place for herself in this world, a place where she could thrive. After asking several townspeople for help, she found work at a small bakery. The owner, a kind woman named Mrs. Hassan, welcomed her warmly. "You seem capable and determined," she said. "We can always use someone willing to learn and work hard." Amina smiled, feeling a sense of relief and pride. She had earned her place, not through anyone's decision but her own courage and actions. The bakery became her first home in this new chapter. She woke early to help prepare bread and pastries, learning quickly how to knead the dough, measure ingredients, and serve customers with care. Each day brought small challenges, but each challenge also brought a growing sense of accomplishment. For the first time, Amina felt the sweetness of independence, the knowledge that her work, her decisions, and her efforts belonged solely to her. As weeks passed, Amina also sought ways to continue her education. She had always dreamed of learning more, of reading books that told stories of faraway places and ideas beyond the village. A small library in town became her sanctuary. She spent hours reading, discovering new subjects, and imagining a future full of possibilities. Each book she read strengthened her mind and her resolve. She realized that knowledge was another form of freedom, a tool that no one could take from her. Evenings were often quiet and reflective. Amina would sit by the bakery's small garden, watching the sun set and feeling a sense of peace she had never known. The fear of being claimed, the humiliation, and the constant pressure had all but disappeared. She had learned to protect herself, to trust her instincts, and to embrace her independence. She understood that courage was not about fighting others. It was about standing up for oneself and making choices that honored one's own worth. Despite the safety and routine, memories of her village and family sometimes returned. She thought about her parents, who had believed they could control her life. She wondered if they would understand one day, if they could ever respect the choices she made. She also thought about the neighbors, the men who had tried to claim her, and the moments of fear that had almost broken her spirit. Each memory was painful, yet it reminded her of how far she had come. She had survived, learned, and grown stronger because of it. One afternoon, as Amina walked through the town square, she noticed a group of children playing. Their laughter was bright and unrestrained, a sound she had not heard in weeks. She watched them, feeling a stirring in her heart. She realized that part of freedom was sharing it, helping others, and inspiring courage. She approached the children slowly, speaking gently, and began teaching them simple games and stories. The children's eyes lit up, and she felt a joy she had never experienced before. In helping others, she found another kind of freedom, the freedom to bring happiness and hope into someone else's life. Amina also began forming friendships with people in town. She met others who had faced hardships, women and men who had struggled against injustice or poverty. Through these friendships, she learned that she was not alone. Each story she heard, each shared moment, strengthened her resolve and reminded her that life could be full of support, trust, and mutual respect. She discovered that community was not just about shared space but shared care and understanding. Months passed, and Amina grew into a confident, capable young woman. She managed her work at the bakery, continued her studies at the library, and nurtured friendships that gave her strength. She learned to plan for her future, saving small amounts of money and thinking about the next steps she would take. Each day she reminded herself of Elia's words, "Courage is moving forward despite fear." She lived by that principle, letting it guide every decision, every action, and every dream she pursued. One day, a letter arrived at the bakery. It was from someone she had helped along the way, a person who remembered her courage and wanted to connect. Amina opened it carefully, reading the kind words inside. The letter reminded her that her choices had consequences, not just for herself but for others. By claiming her freedom, she had inspired hope in someone else. That thought filled her with pride and purpose. Amina also thought about how she might help girls in situations like the one she had escaped. She began speaking quietly with trusted friends and neighbors, sharing her story and offering advice to those who felt trapped. She did not want anyone to feel powerless. She wanted others to know that courage, self-respect, and determination could change their lives, just as it had changed hers. Through her work, education, and acts of kindness, Amina built a life she could be proud of. She no longer feared being claimed or controlled. She knew the power of her own voice, the strength of her own choices, and the value of her own dreams. Each day, she woke with purpose and went to sleep with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had faced danger, survived it, and transformed it into a life of meaning. The memory of Elias, the cowboy who had ridden in and saved her from being treated as property, never left her. She often thought about the moment he told her, "You belong only to yourself." Those words became her guiding principle. They reminded her that no one could define her worth, and no one could dictate the path of her life. She carried those words with her in every action, every decision, and every dream she pursued. As the years passed, Amina grew into a woman known for her kindness, courage, and independence. People admired her not just for surviving hardships, but for using her experience to guide and inspire others. She had turned fear into strength, oppression into freedom, and helplessness into wisdom. The girl who had once been treated as property had become a beacon of hope, showing that life could be reclaimed through courage and determination. One evening, as she sat by the bakery window watching the sunset, Amina reflected on her journey. She thought about the little girl who had feared for her life, the moments of terror, and the spark of hope that had never been extinguished. She smiled softly, knowing that the girl she had once been was still with her, but stronger, wiser, and free. Amina whispered quietly to herself, as she had many times before, "I belong to myself." No one can take that away." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of her entire journey, the fear she had faced, the courage she had discovered, and the life she had claimed for herself. Her life was not perfect, and the world still held challenges. But Amina had learned to meet them with strength, wisdom, and courage. She had discovered the power of choice, the value of independence, and the importance of self-respect. And most importantly, she had learned that true freedom was not something given by others. It was something claimed, nurtured, and protected by oneself. And so, under the setting sun, surrounded by the sounds of life and laughter, Amina looked forward with hope. She had survived, she had grown, and she had reclaimed her life. The girl who had once been trapped by fear and circumstance now stood tall, free, and ready to live fully on her own terms.